The WNBA was already under pressure. Then Sophie Cunningham became one of the loudest voices in the entire conversation. And suddenly, the debate wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about Caitlin Clark. It was about race. It was about physical play. It was about officiating. It was about whether some players are being treated differently from others. And now, Cunningham's name has been dragged directly into one of the most explosive arguments surrounding the league. Because after weeks of controversy, fans are asking a question that the WNBA cannot easily ignore. Is Caitlin Clark receiving special treatment, or is she actually being treated unfairly? The timing couldn't be more explosive. Cunningham has already become one of the most recognizable voices in the current WNBA controversy after making strong comments about women's sports and transgender eligibility. The league subsequently condemned what it described as bad faith efforts and emphasized inclusion and respectful dialogue. But that controversy is only one piece of the bigger story. There is another argument happening underneath it. The Caitlin Clark argument. Because Clark isn't simply another WNBA player anymore. She's one of the biggest names in women's basketball. And that popularity has created an uncomfortable question for the league. Does Caitlin Clark's enormous popularity help the WNBA, or does it create resentment and division inside the league? Some fans believe Clark is targeted. Others believe she receives excessive attention and protection. Some players have publicly or indirectly challenged the way the league handles physical play. And every time another controversial incident happens, the debate gets louder. Now add Sophie Cunningham to that conversation. Cunningham has already shown that she's willing to speak openly when she believes something is wrong. So when her name gets connected to the Caitlin Clark debate, fans immediately start asking, is this the moment somebody finally says what everyone else is afraid to say? And the answer may be more complicated than either side wants to admit. To understand why this controversy has become so explosive, you have to understand Caitlin Clark's position inside the WNBA. Clark entered the league carrying an enormous amount of attention. She wasn't just a highly drafted rookie. She arrived with a massive college following. Her games attracted extraordinary interest. Her jersey became one of the most recognizable products in women's basketball. And wherever Clark went, crowds followed. That created an unusual situation for the WNBA. The league suddenly had a player who attracted casual sports fans who might never have watched a WNBA game before. But popularity comes with consequences. Every foul involving Clark receives attention. Every argument involving Clark gets clipped. Every controversial play gets replayed. Every criticism of Clark becomes part of a larger political and cultural debate. That's where the word privilege enters the conversation. Some critics argue that Clark's enormous popularity means she receives disproportionate attention from media and fans. Others argue that the attention isn't privilege at all. They say it's simply the natural result of becoming the league's biggest commercial star. And there's a major difference between those two arguments. If a player receives more media coverage because millions of people want to watch her, that's market demand. If officials deliberately give someone preferential treatment, that's a completely different accusation. The problem is that social media frequently blends the two. Caitlin Clark gets attention. Therefore, some people say she must be protected. Clark gets fouled. Therefore, others say the league is targeting her. Neither conclusion automatically follows. But the perception itself matters. Because professional sports depend on trust. Players need to trust officials. Fans need to trust the league. And teams need to believe that the rules are being applied consistently. Recent WNBA controversies have intensified those concerns, with commentators pointing to physical play, officiating, player treatment, and the league's handling of major disputes. That's why the Caitlin Clark debate has become bigger than Caitlin Clark. It's really a debate about fairness. And fairness is one of the most emotionally powerful words in sports. Sophie Cunningham has developed a reputation for being outspoken. She's not the type of player who disappears into the background. Her physical style has already made her a major figure in the Fever's identity. And her connection to Caitlin Clark has made her even more recognizable. Cunningham has previously defended Clark and became widely associated with the Fever's willingness to respond when Clark gets caught in physical confrontations. That history matters because fans don't view Cunningham as a neutral observer. They see her as someone willing to stand beside Clark. Someone willing to say what she thinks. Someone who doesn't seem particularly interested in avoiding controversy. That's why any statement from Cunningham can immediately become bigger than the original comment. And that's exactly what has happened during the current WNBA controversy. Her comments about transgender athletes triggered significant backlash and support. The issue became so politically charged that it expanded beyond basketball. The WNBA responded by emphasizing inclusion and condemning efforts it characterized as attempts to marginalize people. Meanwhile, Cunningham became a target for criticism from some fans while gaining support from others. The result? Her name became attached to one of the biggest cultural arguments surrounding the league. But here's where the Caitlin Clark connection becomes fascinating. Because Clark herself has generally been much more cautious when discussing controversial league policy questions. Recent reporting says Clark deferred the policy debate to governing bodies and emphasized focusing on basketball. That creates an interesting contrast. Cunningham is outspoken. Clark is more measured. Yet they are teammates. And that means every controversial statement involving Cunningham can potentially create questions about where Clark stands. Does Clark agree? Does she disagree? Does she simply stay out of it? And most importantly, should she even be expected to take a side? That's a question the media rarely asks. Athletes aren't politicians. They don't have to comment on every controversy. And silence isn't necessarily agreement or disagreement. Sometimes silence simply means, I don't want to get involved. But in today's sports environment, that's becoming increasingly difficult. Because fans want players to choose sides. And once they do, they often become symbols of much larger political arguments. Now we get to the part that has caused some of the strongest reactions. The idea that Caitlin Clark receives privilege simply because of her status. This argument is incredibly complicated. On one side, critics point out that Clark receives enormous attention. She's featured constantly. Her games attract major audiences. Media organizations closely follow her. And every incident involving her can dominate the sports conversation. From that perspective, it's understandable why some players or fans might feel that the league's attention is disproportionately focused on one athlete. But there's another side. Caitlin Clark didn't create the demand for her. Fans did. Viewers did. Broadcasters did. Sponsors did. And the WNBA benefits financially and culturally from that attention. So why should Clark be criticized for being popular? That's the contradiction at the center of the entire debate. The league wants the attention. Teams want the ticket sales. Broadcasters want the audience. Sponsors want the exposure. But once that attention creates controversy, everyone starts asking whether Clark is receiving too much of it. And that's where the phrase privilege becomes dangerous. Because it can describe very different things. Privilege can mean preferential treatment. It can mean unequal opportunity. It can refer to social advantages. Or it can simply become a political label used during an argument. Those aren't interchangeable. If someone claims Clark receives preferential officiating, there should be evidence. If someone claims she's targeted unfairly, there should be evidence. If someone claims race plays a role, that requires serious evidence and careful analysis. A viral clip isn't enough to prove a systemic claim. But that doesn't mean players' concerns should automatically be dismissed. That's the balance the WNBA has struggled to find. And the current environment makes that balance even harder. Because every disagreement gets amplified. A player makes a comment. Fans react. Another player responds. Media personalities enter the conversation. Politicians comment. Then social media turns everything into a culture war battle. At that point, basketball becomes almost secondary. And that's exactly what some people fear is happening to the WNBA. This is where the headline becomes bigger than any individual player. Is the WNBA broken? That's a dramatic claim. But there are legitimate reasons why people are asking difficult questions. The league is experiencing tremendous growth. At the same time, it is dealing with intense controversy. Attendance and viewership have received major attention. The league has expanded. Media rights have become dramatically more valuable. More casual fans are watching. But alongside that growth has come greater scrutiny. Every mistake is magnified. Every controversial foul becomes a national conversation. Every player disagreement can become political. And every statement from a star can trigger an enormous reaction. That's the price of becoming more popular. The WNBA is no longer operating in a relatively small sports ecosystem. It's now part of the mainstream American sports conversation. And mainstream attention means mainstream criticism. The league's recent controversies have included questions about physical play, officiating, player safety, racial tension, transgender inclusion, and leadership. That's a lot for any league to manage. But there's also an important counter-argument. A league having controversy doesn't necessarily mean it's broken. The NBA has controversies. The NFL has controversies. Major League Baseball has controversies. The Olympics have controversies. Every major sports organization faces disputes involving officiating, player behavior, politics, media coverage, and league policies. The question isn't whether controversy exists. The question is whether leadership responds effectively. That's where the WNBA faces its biggest challenge. Can it protect players without creating perceptions of favoritism? Can it encourage political and social expression while keeping the focus on basketball? Can it handle criticism without appearing defensive? Can it grow rapidly without losing trust? Those are much harder questions than who is right, Caitlin Clark or Sophie Cunningham? Because this isn't really about choosing between them. They may not even disagree. The bigger issue is whether the league can create an environment where players with different opinions can coexist without every disagreement becoming a war. And that's the real test. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Caitlin Clark is receiving special treatment? Or do you think she's actually being treated more harshly because every incident involving her gets magnified? And what about Sophie Cunningham? Do you respect her willingness to speak openly, or do you think her recent comments have made the WNBA controversy even more divisive? Most importantly, is the WNBA actually broken, or is this simply what happens when a rapidly growing league enters the biggest spotlight in women's sports? Drop your opinion in the comments. And don't just tell us who you support. Tell us why. Because this debate isn't going away anytime soon. If you want more Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Indiana Fever, and WNBA controversies, subscribe and turn on notifications.